Okay, I think we can get started. Right, thank you everyone for making it to the fifth and last session of the program for the meeting. And I want to thank particularly those who are tuning in online. I know it's quite late on a Friday in different time zones, so if you're online, thank you for staying with us. Right, so this fifth session of the program is going to be focusing on supporting the ecosystem. So again, we can allow recognition for preprint review to take place and grow and thrive. I know that we started some conversation about some technical things this morning, so hopefully we will come back to a lot of those items in more detail later on. But to get us started on this part of the program, we wanted to start with presenting a proposal for a citation, for the citation of preprints with reviews and preprint reviews. So what I'm going to be presenting is a proposal that was developed by the working group involving representatives of funders, institutions, and researchers. And hopefully you can see that there. What you can see there is what we developed as citation format proposal for citing preprints with reviews and preprint reviews. So very briefly on the top part, it relates to preprints with reviews. This is based on the citation format that the NIH provides for citing preprints. So as you can see, it starts with the usual citation for the preprint, and then we have added several elements to that citation to signal different activities that have taken place related to the preprint. So the first line A, relates to signaling reviews requested by the authors themselves for that preprint, followed by the citation for the actual reviews, listing the information on who completed the reviews, the platform where they are posted, the date, and obviously the DOI for that review. The following line includes the author's response, again, similar format, listing where the response could be available, date, and associated DOI. And then the line D, what we have here is a proposal to include endorsements of that preprint that, as it has come up in different conversations already, they can take different forms. So obviously, an acceptance decision from a journal would constitute an endorsement as well. That could be added there, but there are different forms for this. For example, highlights about that preprint contributed by others that could be included, or another suggestion in the context of open science practices is whether that preprint has received any open science badges, for example. So a couple of things that I wanted to highlight is obviously all of the items we include DOI, so URLs. It's important to have a public record for all of this. And the other item that I wanted to highlight is the fact that this includes lines to signal where the authors requested reviews and also the author response to those reviews, because we think it's quite important to, again, signal that the authors are willing to engage with that interaction and that discourse on their work. On the bottom side, you can see the proposal for citation of preprint review. So essentially, this is for citing the actual review as an independent work of a scholarship. And as you can see, it includes the details of the author, so if anonymous listing indicating that. Which preprint the review relates to, the date, the platform where it is available, date, and the associated DOI. So as I mentioned, this was a proposal from the discussions in the working group prior to the meeting, but we are very keen in hearing what you think about this, so we are going to start with another online poll, again, the usual format. If you go to slido.com and just include the hash preprint, you should hopefully see the question, what changes to the proposed citation format would you suggest? This is a free text question, so just type any reactions that you may have to that. We are asking here about changes that you may propose, but if you very, very much love the format, feel free to say that too. We want to see what your thoughts and reactions are to this. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to type the responses, and then we'll display the answers to the poll.
Do we still need to display the format in case people wish preference?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Apologies. Yeah, that's probably helpful.
But hold on. Yeah, I think that actually took down just. Let me. Okay, it's activated. It's activated. It's back. It's back. There's 13 people typing.
How many, sir?
13 people are typing.
Okay. So I'll give them time. Recognize that this one takes a bit more effort than just clicking answer options.
Still 12 people typing.
Okay.
Hopefully not the same 12 people.
It's fine. They may have a lot of comments in response to the format, so that's also useful. Right, so I think we'll give them at least another minute for anyone who's typing.
Oh, I made a mistake.
Yeah.
I wanted to say CVs.
It's a version of record.
I wanted to say CVs, but it says CVS, so it's not the pharmacy.
Okay, 11 people typing. Still.
Okay, fine. Take your time. It's fine. It's Friday afternoon. I know, it may take a bit more effort. And while we wait for the those who are still typing, I realized I forgot to mention something related to the format that hopefully is somewhat intuitive, but just in case. As it has been discussed before, there may be different reviews provided on the same preprint, so the idea would be that some of these lines, you could have several lines reporting reviews, responses, etc. How are we going with the replies?
8 people.
Okay, fine. That's all right. I don't want to put any pressure on anybody.
Down to 3.
Good.
Okay, just one person typing.
Yeah.
Shall I move on and display?
I think
Okay.
it will display. They can move on.
Okay, so I think we can let the last person who's typing complete their thoughts and reactions, but we can start displaying some of the answers here. Right. Hopefully you can see that. Some positive responses. This is about the fact that not all of the products may have a DOI, something to consider. It's rather complicated, lots of details in it, so something to bear in mind. Important to include the version of the preprint in the citation. Absolutely important to know which is the version that the different elements are referring to. Okay. Clarification as to say, available from, so probably we can just simplify that part of the format. Some clarification as to what is meant in the section about the highlight. I guess, where do we draw the line in terms of what should be included there? Again, good point about the fact that many preprints are discussed on social media. Good that be something that would be added. You can obviously have a URL for that, but does it count there? Okay, another item about the preprint versions, which has also been mentioned. Important not to be restrictive about what type of elements may be included, particularly in section D. It's true. We have included things that we, I guess, based on current practice and the products that are available now, but this may change in the future, of course. Okay. Some comments about the fact that we did include the anonymous term to account for, again, all of this discussion about the fact that some may prefer to post the reviews anonymously. How can that be handled efficiently as part of the citation? Okay, and some clarification about open science badges. I think we were thinking of things such as the badges provided by the Center of Open Science, but again, there may be others. Okay, let's continue to show. Okay, how to get this worked into XML? Good question. Okay, some comments about the fact that this is quite long. It is very complete. Is it too complicated? Maybe we can have a discussion around that as well. Are there ways of simplifying this without necessarily losing some of the, I guess, principles that we wanted to see reflected here in terms of the different interactions and their value in the process? Okay, some ways in which this could be automated as well. Streamlining, again, similar comments about the fact that it may be a bit too complex. Some more comments about complexity. Okay. Oops, sorry. I think I may have gone too far, apologies. Oops. Okay, I'm not very good handling this with my fingers, as you may see. Okay, sorry, I think this was there before. Okay, more support for simplification, versioning. I think we're seeing some trends emerge here already. Okay, some things, again, length. Okay, this may be useful for other purposes, but may be tricky to include everything in the citation. Again, comments about the fact that it's a lot of detail. Okay, suggestion to maybe if we need to simplify, perhaps start with the review requested section. The This would be useful for CVs, may be able to simplify citations for the journal. Okay, I just want to make sure that hopefully get to all of the answers. Yes, so again, some more comments about the fact that having a more simple format will likely increase adoption, and also what are the ramifications for metadata requirements. Very long. And I think I got to the bottom. Thank you. Right, so I think we've seen already a few main topics raised here. The ones that come out for me are this element of, we try to be very thorough to cover the different interactions that could take place in the context of particularly preprints that have associated reviews. But again, the reaction is that this may be a bit too complicated. Maybe we are not there yet in terms of having all of that included. Can we find some way of simplifying that? The item about the version of the preprint being important, of course, we need to make sure that we are clear as to where each interaction fits in terms of what version is being reviewed. And again, some elements as to how can we fit this in the context of other technical requirements, such as metadata. I just wanted to open now for the floor for any comments on the format, on the responses, if anybody would like to elaborate on the comments they provided on slido.com, or again, any other thoughts as to the implementation of the citation for different stakeholders.
I just want to flag that there's one response in the Q&A which says that this is it flags the complexity of this format. And I think there's another suggestion. If you click on one new response down there, I hope that works. Or maybe you have to actually scroll up. Apologies. Maybe you do have to scroll. Okay, yeah, there's a suggestion, another suggestion there as food for thought. Okay.
Yeah, Bola, please.
I just wanted to make a suggestion that citations have different purposes. When you use them for your own work, I think it makes sense to list a lot of things that show endorsements and that it was peer-reviewed and so on. But I'm concerned if we are using these kinds of formats for references in papers. I think ideally references in papers should be just to the scholarly contributions that you are citing. And that means you just cite the preprint. And if you want to cite how it was perceived in the community, you cite the peer review report that makes the point that you want to emphasize. Get away we don't want to signal through those references how that work was perceived, because we know the Matthew effect changes how often something is cited based on the impact in the community. I feel like it's not scholarly doing it that way. So we should reserve, this is very useful, but we should reserve that for bibliographies or for places where the scientists can want to shine. Mm-hmm.
Important clarification there as to what the use would be. This is relevant for CVs. It may not work in the context of, as you mentioned, bibliography citations. Any other thoughts or comments on the format, or again, anything that may help implementation, or what are the potential uses where it may work versus not? Please, Thomas.
Well, for the implementation, so I agree that it's very complex to fit that in the sort of usual practice of citing the literature. Whether it's sufficient to just cite the preprint, I don't think it actually works, because you have to sort of make the link between the preprint and the reviews to say, these things belong together. And I think that's the difficulty where you see there. Now, there would be a technical solution that does not yet exist, or it exists, but it's distributed or whatever, is to have services, maybe one service or several services that mirror each other, that index referee preprint, and this referee preprint receive it can be resolved to a page where the preprint is linked or even displayed, and the reviews are also accessible. And that would be a very elegant way. And with this resolution mechanism, we would need only one identifier, which is the DOI of the preprint itself, but it resolves to a page where the preprint and the reviews are extremely visible. It could be bioRxiv itself, provided the implementation of the display of the review would be satisfactory, which it is maybe not yet quite. But again, that would simplify the whole format thing to just say, I resolve this preprint DOI to a page where the reviews are going to be very visible and you can see that what it is.
So Denis has his hand up, by the way.
Oh, yes, thank you. Sorry, Denis and then Sarah.
No, I wanted to go back to the previous remark. So I do agree that it's very complex and we should keep this in bibliography, for example. But I make a clear distinction between the preprints and we don't know if it is validated or not. So I would suggest to keep the endorsement I suggested by Thomas Guillemot. So it's just to clearly indicate preprints when it has been endorsed, based on peer reviews. So that will be a clear distinction and very useful distinction for readers and for reviewers of other papers, seeing that it's not only a preprint, but a validated preprint. I think is important.
Thank you. So, Sarah, please.
I just wanted to touch on this idea of how do we make sure that there is a maintained connection between the reviews and the preprint itself. And I think that we talked about this, a lot in the last session as well. It seems to me that in most relational databases, you have this sort of like one-to-many relationship. And so if as preprint reviews get DOIs, if we can add metadata into the DOIs saying this preprint refers to this DOI, then once you just get that simple metadata, building a site like what Thomas just suggested would be relatively easy, where you basically just say, okay, for every DOI, find all the DOIs that reference this. So I think that like from a metadata perspective, it's relatively trivial to get that interaction if DOI.org will actually add that into metadata for DOIs.
Thank you. I think Damian had the hand up earlier.
Just to respond to Denis, I can't see that working for any system that doesn't have a binary accept reject decision. So if we're trying to move away from that, then we can't. If there is endorsed or not endorsed, then we're back to where we started with journals. So I can't see how that can work really.
Thank you. I think somebody online have the hand up. Apologies, I cannot read your first name, but please go ahead. Oh, sorry, Catherine.
Hi, yeah. I was just sort of adding on to what a few people have said around the difference between a preprint, a refereed preprint, and a possibly endorsed preprint. And I wonder whether those things could be distinguished in a much more simple way, just perhaps using those words rather than necessarily feeling the need. I'm thinking about citations within papers, that we could come up with some language that distinguishes between the sort of different levels of review and or endorsement that a preprint has had in a very simple way in a reference list on a paper, because I think that as people have said, this is great for CVs and stuff, but for reference lists it feels very unwieldy to me.
Yeah, good question, I guess, about I think it's something that was mentioned earlier about the thresholds in terms of interactions and level of verification or checks or endorsements that happen on a preprint. I guess that this would also require some structure around it and defining all of those. But I think Martin has the hand up as well. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what we're trying to communicate with this. Is it something meant to be something, I think goes back to the point from Denis. Is it something about the status of the preprint, which I think for better or, it will be interpreted in that way, whatever we do, in the same way that people look at journal names to decide whether something is worth reading. And I can see opportunity for gaming the system. You post your preprint, you write the review, send it to one of your mates who puts it on a preprint platform, and that will be, get a DOI and then be reported in the citations. And I think there's potential for gaming the system here, which I think having, endorsed preprints is maybe a route to go if we can kind of work out how to do that practically.
Okay, interesting comment there. It resonates with me, the element that you say of potential for gaming the system and making sure that this is just not more lines in your CV with a lot of DOIs and, that maybe you organize yourself. At the same time, if we want to have a system that signals the fact that different people can participate in different ways, how do we find that balance so that we don't make it too restrictive? Right, I see Soumya has the hand up. Please go ahead.
I just want to comment on the fact that we've used this word endorsement a couple of times. It's also part of the proposed citation. And I think it might be helpful to think about what do we mean by endorsement? What does that actually mean?
Anybody?
And how would it, how would it manifest on a preprint?
Anybody would like to provide clarification on it? Oh, sorry, Danny, please go ahead.
No, what I call endorsement is the fact that there is somebody based on peer reviews that declare as scientifically valid a preprint, an article. That's what I call endorsement. Somebody on the top of peer reviews saying it's good enough. I consider as a valid piece of work, and people can trust this. People, its citizens, its journalists, its other peers, so they can trust that it has been fully evaluated and reach a sufficient level of scientific level, so to be considered as valid. This is what I call endorsement. This is the last step of publish, review, curate system. This is a curation at the end. And this is important because, of course, scientists can go on the reviews saying, okay, I do agree or disagree, but a lot of people are not good enough, have not the expertise to say, okay, I can go into the reviews and decide by myself. I need somebody else to do that for me. And I think it is clearly crucial.
So I think that's really helpful. But why wouldn't we just say it's been peer reviewed or it has received peer feedback?
Just, if I may on that, it's just because a peer review, it can be a very bad review saying it's very bad preprint which clearly is bad science. It has been reviewed. Yeah. So if you say it's a preprint review, it doesn't mean it's valid or not. Yeah. This is what I mean.
Okay. So I wanted to add
I think I see endorsement as positive validation, and that includes acceptance by a journal. But it doesn't have to be acceptance by a journal. It can be another kind of positive validation. But as Danny just pointed out, peer review alone is not a positive validation because it can be critical, very critical of the actual paper.
Exactly. I think in the citation, that's why we have this different line. The line that signals there is a presence of reviews, and then the line that explains here there's been a positive reaction. I don't know if I don't see something there. Thomas.
Well, just briefly, I'm a little bit confused because for me, endorsement is a really just a reinvented word for accepted, and that's just a journal. So if we have peer-reviewed preprint with an endorsement, well, it's just a journal. It's published. It's done. And I think we have not really advanced to capture this intermediate step where there's a preprint that has been peer-reviewed and addressed by the authors. And on that aspect, I have to say I really agree with Eli. If there is an endorsement, we have reinvented the journal. Endorsement is just another word for accepted. And I would certainly not encourage to limit citation to that, because otherwise we have not advanced too much.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, Sarah, I missed you earlier.
Not even encourage not to limit citation, but I feel like by providing this in like a citation recommendation format, we're essentially sanctioning that there is a higher level beyond reviewed. And just saying that, y'all should be aiming for that level. A review is not enough. You need one of these certified entities to put their stamp on this.
I think the question is doesn't it add value to know whenever there is an interaction, an assessment of some form? I don't know what term to use, but it goes in one direction or the other. I'm asking the question.
I mean, I guess my worry there is how do you decide who can endorse something? What is a valid endorsement? I can go on and say, this is a great paper, there are no flaws here. And Nature can go on and say, this is a great paper, there are no flaws here. But in citations, those are going to look the same. And so, then you have some kind of like judgment on the reader side, which again, we've reinvented journals there. It's just a question of, what is the the value of the endorser.
And just to be clear, I think endorsement acceptance in a journal, I think it's good. But we have journals, and our journals are superb doing that job. They have a very elaborate process to reach this endorsement. But I don't think we should reinvent that wheel, but rather capture what is earlier.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I see online we have a couple of hands up. So, Prachi.
Yeah, thanks. So I wanted to sort of agree with this idea about definitely not recapitulating the journal system. We already have one. We don't need one, especially with one that doesn't have sort of, the same extensive infrastructure to do exactly that thing. And embrace the idea of this fluidity that just seeking this point of time truth of what we think about a piece of work, it doesn't really make any sense. And I like the idea of just re-emphasizing the preprint itself and saying, look, this, if we have the infrastructure in which you can actually track over time any new additions, any new endorsements that we don't have to be mutually exclusive, of course, many different entities with many different purposes and expertise can endorse and evaluate something, and just have it be something that is a living, breathing thing where the infrastructure itself keeps it up to date, where you don't have all of these different, citations, and certainly like what Bodo said, which is, that as on your own CV, you can highlight any one of those endorsements that you wish, and having a way to do that. But I'm sort of thinking about the situation we have right now with the NIH, where preprints are accepted for NIH consideration, but what typically you can do is add a preprint to my bibliography, and then when reviewers go, look, it is whatever that current state is. You're not really supposed to, submit that after you submit your grant, but at the same time, you still have, the fact that it's a living, breathing body of work, new endorsements, new evaluations. Maybe the original ones were endorsing, but then some new critical thing came out. It's important that, that people keep that living, breathing thing, so that any sort of thing that we do here should be some sort of value add over the existing journal system and not trying to recapitulate it. So there's just a lot. I think we were creative about what new advantages can we get, embracing the preprint itself and having that be like a living, breathing piece of work that you can always see what's the latest state of endorsement or whatever,
Thanks, Patsy. I think Naomi, you had the hand up earlier, and then Denny.
Yeah, so I think Thomas really captured a little bit of what I was trying to get at. To me, an endorsement that implies positive outcome. It's a thumbs up. But, I think what I got from what Denis was saying is that endorsement is perhaps PCI is using it also implies like a quality control check, right? That this work has passed certain measures of trust and integrity, and it could be, it's a solid piece on those grounds. So I wonder if maybe we don't need to find a different word that's more precise, that doesn't bring with it a whole bunch of value judgments about, let's say, the impact or the significance or what have you of the work, to reflect that it's passed a certain set of checks and has acquired a certain standing, if you will.
Yes, thank you. Denis, please.
No, I do agree with this. It's just to answer Thomas and Damian's comments. I mean, the idea is not to reinvent journal. The idea is we do not necessarily need journal. I mean, but we need a PRC system, because at the end there is no need for like a journal to put a version of record. But it's not a question of version of record. We can still in the system without journal saying that the paper is endorsed, meaning valid. That is the last step of the PRC model. And I think it can be done outside journals, actually. So I do agree with Damian that we do no longer need journal. Definitely agree with this, but we still need the last step of the PRC model.
Yeah, and we'll have Katrina on the mic.
Just to go back to the sort of simplification of this whole thing, we don't want to create a separate preprint system that mirrors the journal system. We have a journal system where the reviews are endorsed by being in a journal, but there's no actual independent endorsement of those individual reviews. And going back to the sort of point that Bodo is making, preprint reviews or whatever should be citable, and preprints should be independently citable. I also think that peer review reports of journal articles should also be citable, and then they are just used in the scholarly discourse as any other research object, and they're cited either to make a point, or you're contradicting a point, or you're pointing out a flaw in a paper or in a review, and they're just part of that. And there's no separate system or hierarchy for either preprints or journal articles. Just peer review reports are citable items and can be used within the citation of like any other scholarly object. And forget the endorsement. I mean, if we opened up the peer review process of journals, we're going to see a huge quantity of reviewer reports that would never meet the standards we're discussing that are required for preprints at the moment. You know, we just haven't got access to them. So let's just open it up and cite and get scholars and independent researchers to cite what they think is important. And the good ones will rise to the top, and there'll be lots of rubbish at the bottom, just as there is in terms of articles. Those just get ignored, some of them, you know, whatever, and just let it happen rather than trying to create a hierarchy.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on the format? What I'm hearing so far, again, as usual, through my own biases and my interpretation of the discussion, is there is at least value in signaling all of these interactions for the purposes of individual researcher CVs. That's something that they should be able to highlight, but I don't think we have necessarily settled on these conversations to whether it is useful or not to have this additional signal of the endorsement and whether that's the right term within that as well. Again, any further thoughts? Yeah, please, sir.
Sorry, just a thought about having a specific endorsement versus maybe we could add a keyword, an optional keyword after review, and maybe have like a suggested list. I mean, I know that this is getting very close to what Mike Eisen has specifically said. He doesn't want the summary statements in eLife to be. But, you know, having sort of a set of recognized, like, this is an endorsement of rigor, you know, those sorts of things to maybe indicate some tone that a review had. This sort of gives the option where if somebody wants to include that information in their citation record, they can. But since it's just, again, an optional metadata thing, you know, it doesn't have to be there. And so those of us who don't want or who don't see the value of these signals don't necessarily have to include it.
Okay, Iratxe.
Just one last point I wanted to make was the, you know, maybe the thing, rather than searching for some ground truth from what people think and trying to have the evaluation be that the thing that actually matters is that the preprint is evaluatable, right? That the data are available, that you know, that the, you know, it's, you know, there's some amount of validity of the, you know, availability or, you know, validity of the data itself, and just such that people can't just like plant a flag by putting some sort of preprint up, but just that there is something that can be evaluated over time. And that's maybe the only thing that matters, you know, because that everything else is just some sense of security of truth and correctness and something that will be done over time and be endorsed by various entities, either through the journal system or not, or whatever. But maybe the thing that actually can be determined at a single point in time is whether enough information is available in order to evaluate it by anybody.
Thank you. I think we had Jamie here and then Bodo, and we're going to be closing. So, Jamie.
Yeah, so you know, one thing I really worry about with too much emphasis on standards and creating sort of research products that are classified in these different ways is that it takes the emphasis off of this evaluable aspect of the preprint that Iratxe just described, and where we've made so much progress in people being able to recognize and evaluate them themselves and give them worth. And I do understand that some reviewers, I'm going to pick on the EMBO postdoc fellowship again, right, might be really, might count a refereed preprint more than a preprint. the same way, for the past decades, they've counted a Nature paper more than a Nature Communications paper, more than, some other journal paper. But other reviewers actually read the papers and, weren't impressed by a certain paper in Nature and ranked something else, above it because they thought the science was better, not the journal name. And so by focusing too much on the standards and whether the review was posted in a certain format or attributed in a certain way, we're getting further and further away from putting the emphasis on the fact that the evaluation has to come down to reading the science, reading the evaluations that occur alongside the science, not the fact that they just exist and that people checked all the boxes in the right ways to get their ORCiD ID link, but just that the point that you've made, that they can be read and then people will have to evaluate it. And so I think it is so dangerous for us to wall off the vast majority of preprints that aren't getting comments at all right now from the small, the 10% that are getting comments. And then within that 10%, create a class that has 2 comments from an authorized community with identified things, when in fact we can empower evaluators at the tenure level or at the grant level to just say, preprints are the thing, just like journal articles were the thing. It was stupid to evaluate journal articles just by the journal that they appeared in. It's stupid to evaluate preprints just based on the fact that they had 2 reviews done by people in this specific way. Read the stuff. It will be stronger if if it's got thoughtful reviews around it. And by the way, it will be stronger because the authors will have integrated those reviews and improved the preprint in other ways. And just say, that's it. All right. Bodo.
I think that I want, just exactly the same thing. When you cite an article in at the bottom of your paper, it is a form of endorsement. Sometimes it's the opposite of endorsement, but you have read the paper, presumably, and that's all this takes. It messes it up when we include in there what other people thought about the work. It's your paper where you cite the other papers, the scholarly outputs from other people. It's your opinion that you reflect there, and that's why you cite things. And if you are unhappy about somebody else's work, then you cite the peer review report that criticizes that work. There's no need to have the validation from some entity that says this is good work. If you disagree with that work, you would still want to cite it. This is your opinion, I think. That should go in there.
Thank you. So we are coming to the end of this session. Thank you, everybody, for the contributions. I think one of the messages for me is the need to bear in mind, what are we citing and why, and what are the purposes. And I think for the format, there are coming many discussions about what may be useful or simple or more feasible to implement. We are going to be moving on to the next part of the program. And here we are going to be hearing from a group of platforms and entities that are working on indexing. We heard this morning already about the importance of discoverability of these preprint reviews. So I'm very pleased that we're hearing from these important actors in this space. And to get us started, we have Melissa Harrison from Europe PMC. Over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so slightly difficult to follow all of that discussion, so I'm going to kind of bring it back down slightly. So at Europe PMC, we are indexing preprints and have done for some time now, and we have over 500,000 preprints now indexed, and 36,000 of them are in full text. And we indexed 25 preprint servers, and we've identified a further group to add. So currently, what we have is external links that are provided from other groups. So, and we use that to then show the reviews. Now, the external link service, only 11% of reviews are to preprints. So say 100% of these external links are reviews. only 11% of them are actually going to preprints, and we're getting them from Sciety, Publons, Prelights, Outbreak Science, the Rapid Pre-Review, and PCI. And so that's on the left. Don't know my left from my right. The other side, you can see how they're displayed. So they're displayed at the underneath the article, and and you can see from the left as well. So this is great. This is a kind of starting point for us. But for me, I know the problem is that it's just a dumb URL, and I love metadata. I want more context there to understand what's going on. And also, obviously, the vast majority of these links are coming from Sciety. So there can be repetition there as well, because a lot of Sciety is also an aggregator. So that's what we're doing now. We have just recently done some user research of what we could potentially show if we had more metadata. So I know there's been a lot of discussion about DOIs here, and from my perspective, Crossref DOIs, DataCite DOIs, perfect. There's an API, I can pull in all the metadata and I can display. But the problem is that very few preprint peer review groups are using DOIs. And you'll hear in a bit about doc maps, and we've already heard about review commons. But what we are focusing on at the moment is the idea that we can use doc maps kind of as a proof of concept way with review commons to pull in the metadata that is potentially available there. And Sciety uses doc maps as well, so the metadata is not quite the same, so we'll start thinking from a review commons point of view. And these mock-ups that we user tested were based on anything that was available from review commons. And so these are kind of, there were other screenshots I could show, but these are the two main things that I wanted to show. And what we found from our from the people that we talked to is they like the logos, but they like a timeline. They want the timeline, as sequentially what happens, but actually they want the author responses under the reviews. So it's not really a timeline, but it's something slightly different. And also they wanted it to be clear whether it's a journal or a community review. So it's quite kind of complex as to kind of how we're going to serve people and what they want, but this is kind of where we're basing it at the moment. And our next steps will be to be using doc maps and review commons. We are looking at DOIs as well. I mean, obviously the expansion of peer review DOIs in Crossref is going right up, but it's mainly journal articles, and for us obviously the focus is on preprints, because we want to be able to display the reviews that are happening on that side of things, and then potentially being able to filter based on whether reviews. It'd be lovely to be able to show authors doing all this various linking, what kind of thing it is, rating, extra metadata, but all of this obviously is up for grabs and everyone is talking about, but this is kind of like what we've got available to us and what we can do for now. I think that's me. Oh, and my acknowledgement slide.
Thank you so much, Melissa. So I think we have next Damian Pattinson, who's going to be talking about the platform Sciety. Damian.
Thanks, Iratxe. Okay, so we've heard a bit about Sciety the last couple of days. What we wanted to do when I arrived at eLife a couple of years ago was to try and imagine what the kind of long-term future is of a world in which everyone is reviewing and curating preprints. And then try and build that and sort of, start to kind of get that notion out there that there is a sort of different way of doing it. And the thing that's particularly interesting about preprints that we haven't actually discussed that much is this idea that that you don't just have one place that it ends up in. You can have multiple reviews and you can have multiple endorsements, and that creates this sort of very interesting potential for experimentation. So that was the bit that we were sort of trying to achieve with Sciety. So the main goals that we established early on was that we wanted to have a place to aggregate preprints, and in fact, the preprint reviews, and it became clear actually that was a very large undertaking in itself. And in fact, a lot of what we've had to do is around this kind of basic aggregation of all the different preprint reviewing groups to make them standardized. And I think Gabe's going to talk about doc maps in a sec. But certainly the idea that there was a sort of need to pull them together became a sort of clear focus for Sciety. We also wanted to make it easier to discover reviewed preprints. And that's where the kind of curation pieces became very important. Allow researchers and individual researchers to follow groups and even other individuals who are curating preprints themselves, and make it easier for groups to participate in preprint review and curation. So, a big goal for us is to make this a very multi-organizational and very kind of inclusive world, and one where it's very simple for any group to set up, start reviewing preprints and applying endorsements, and become active in this system. So here's just some screenshots. This is examples of group curation. So first on the left, you can see the list of the sorts of organizations that we're currently indexing on Sciety. There are 22, I believe, at the moment, including, I think, most of the organizations here. Biophysics Collab are not present, but they're a group that they're an example of a group who wanted to set up and start doing review of preprints, and we've been supporting them to do that. We give them a group page that allows them to show a bit about themselves and some information around what they do, how they do preprint review, how they curate, and so on, to try and capture the sort of diversity of approaches that people are taking. And also to create these lists. And the real sort of center of Sciety is this idea that anyone can create a list, and that inclusion on those lists gives some kind of signal of value to a preprint. And so for Biophysics Collab, that includes papers that they've evaluated, papers that they have endorsed, and papers that they're just interested in, ones that perhaps they haven't done themselves, but they're reading and they think would be of interest to the organization, to their readers. This last one, I think, is particularly interesting for potentially scholarly societies as an easy way for them to get involved in the curation of preprints and to start to say to their members, these are interesting papers. We believe that that if you are a physicist, then you would be particularly interested in these papers, and a way of doing that kind of active curation that is sort of independent of any peer review that they may have performed on those papers. Individual curation is something that we have been exploring. I'm not sure how it becomes complicated, but it's something that's quite interesting. So this example, Iratxe does some curation for us. And in fact, you can see here that we actually allow her to provide comments. And so to say, this is why I thought this paper should be included on the list, and this is why it's particularly interesting. And finally, the other interesting thing that we've been exploring is working with Semantic Scholar from the Allen Institute to provide recommendations for groups for papers or preprints that they may be interested in. We've actually built this dashboard. This is an example for rapid reviews. I'm not sure if they're actually using it, but we certainly have been trying to explore ways in which we can deliver papers that could be relevant to any particular group and allow them to then do a step of curation based on these recommendations. Biophysics Collab use these recommendations and have been really sort of impressed with how well the algorithms work to actually pull out papers from the preprint literature that they wouldn't normally find through their normal keyword searches. So that's a really kind of interesting thing that we're hoping to explore. So the idea is that any group who wants to become part of this community can easily do so, set up an instance on Sciety, set up, start to be given lists of potentially interesting papers, curate lists, and even start doing review on top of it so that they can actually become easily become part of this system that we're trying to build. Okay, bang on time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Damian. Right, and up next we have Thomas Lemberger speaking about the platform Early Evidence Base. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have talked a lot about now preprint review, which imposes that the reviews are public. That's valid for preprint peer review, but also for many journals that implement a transparent process. And this raises interesting opportunities on the technical implementation, but also some challenges, how to describe the peer review process in a sort of flexible and machine readable way, how to exchange and aggregate or reference peer reviews across different platforms, how can we attribute credits to reviewers, but on a technical level, and how to use peer review to guide readers to find interesting content. There is a lot of information in the content of reviews, and how to verify the integrity and authenticity of peer reviews, and we discussed a little bit about that. So to start working in practice and experimenting with these issues, we have created, we have built the early evidence base. So this is a very pilot platform that is essentially our test tube for experimenting with solution. We aggregate preprint reviews from various platforms, and we concentrate really on the sort of moderated peer review, structured peer review platforms. The long-term vision of early evidence base is to try to marry the human expertise in the form of peer review, but also automated curation by artificial intelligence. So we are developing tools that read the preprint and in particular focus on the figures to extract causal hypotheses that have been tested in the experiments, build a knowledge graph, aggregate the graph, and in a completely unsupervised way find topics and name the topics, and also identified the most relevant molecules underlying these topics. One implementation that we have put on early evidence base is a visual structural representation of key features that describe preprint review platforms, and this was collaborative work led by Victoria Yan from Azabio. And we have these different features that identify key aspect of the process run by different platforms, whether the authors are driving the submissions, whether the service is selecting the reviewers, or whether the authors are selecting the reviewers, whether there is a right to respond to the reviewers, whether there is a binary decision at the end of the process. And this might be an old screenshot. I think eLife is not on that, so I have still to update the record from eLife to remove the little binary decision. So with this platform, we want also to sort of incorporate a little bit of an ecosystem or tools that might be useful for others. And in a project sponsored by the Wellcome Trust, we developed an open source tool that allows to extract from a standard format that is used in publishing, the MECA format, to extract metadata from manuscripts and the reviews, to deposit this metadata to Crossref and register DOI for reviews. So reviews, every review from Review Commons is assigned an individual DOI to make them citable, and reviewer, if they want, they can claim them. And this also opens the opportunity of a very simple mechanism to link a preprint to the associated reviews by using the functionality of Crossref to find relationships between a document and other documents. So with a preprint DOI, Crossref can be queried very easily, and an aggregator like PMC or any other aggregator can find automatically all the reviews associated with this preprint. So we have integrated that in early evidence base, but now Crossref is an infrastructure that is very much based on the former journal infrastructure, and I think the needs of peer review preprint are much broader than that. So we collaborated with Knowledge Futures, with bioRxiv and eLife to implement the docmap format. And the docmap format is really a machine-readable format that is extremely flexible. It's really super cool. It can essentially represent any kind of processes of document going through stages. And really the peer review is represented in quite a bit of detail as a series of steps, where every step is semantically defined, where there are actors that are also defined contributing to this step. There is an input and output, and this is a very, very good and very granular representation of the peer review process. So we serve this through our API, and essentially it can be used now. And I'm going to finish with that. We want also to explore in ways to display and provide access to the content of the reviews. And we talked about the minuscule box on bioRxiv, but we could also talk, about the minuscule links that we have on our journals that you cannot find. So if you really want to read the reviews on journals or preprint, it is actually quite difficult. So we have, again, this is part of this project of the Wellcome Trust. implemented a little tool, a library that is powered by the docmap format to visualize the peer review process. And you see here an example where, again, it is a timeline. I agree that this is the best choice. We try to really identify who are the actors here, who are the platforms, and then have a condensed but yet very visible representation of the peer review process, and immediate then access to the full content of the peer review process through the 3 reviewers, and including the response and the links to the DOI. So we hope that in this way we can promote the sort of the usefulness of the reviews, but maybe also provide sort of a simple mechanism to cite this referee preprint if citation is necessary, by simply resolving through the DOI of the preprint without having to go through a cascade of separate DOI for every stage of the preprint. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Thomas. And next we have Kathleen Shearer, who will speak about the Notify project. Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. The Notify project is a project of CORE, and CORE stands for the Confederation of Open Access Repositories. And CORE really represents a very large and distributed network of repositories that collect a diversity of content, including preprints. And we think that diversity is very, very important. It's important in order to scale preprint sharing, but also to support bibliodiversity, multilingualism, and so on. But as we have heard, that diversity can cause some problems with discovery of content. And so the Notify project really is about how to improve discovery of related content across a very distributed ecosystem. And it builds on several years of work that CORE has done through what we call the Next Generation Repository project. And this project, the vision that came out of the discussions through this project was really around how to connect repository resources with value-added services. And one of the main use cases that came out of that was connecting the content in repositories with peer review services and peer reviews in general. So it's very simple technology that we're proposing. It's already well established with W3C standards. And again, what we're proposing is a very standardized way to connect preprints with peer reviews. And the technology guys that I work with call this a resource-oriented approach. It means we're not moving content around, and we're actually not even moving metadata around. It's a very simple protocol that connects one DOI or URL with another related piece of content. So the technology that is being used here is linked data notifications, which is essentially how the content is moving around on the web, and activity streams. And activity streams is basically a vocabulary that we're using because we need a standardized vocabulary so every service understands what's being communicated using this protocol. Here's a very simple example I'll give you, and I think this is a little bit too linear for what it really is going to look like, but if you imagine if you're an author and you deposit an article into a repository and you press a button, you say, I want a review from a particular review service, a message will be transmitted to that review service, and it will be processed by that review service, and they will decide whether they are going to provide a review or not. The review service will reply with an acknowledgement, and yes, we're going to review it, or no, we're not going to review it because it's outside of our scope, and so on. And these communications can go the other way around. I'm a reviewer, I've done a review on a preprint, and I'm sending you a message to say, my review is over here. Here's the link to my review. So actually the possibilities for this technology go much farther beyond just connecting preprints with peer reviews. They could connect articles with data sets and so on. But our focus right now is on this particular use case. This is something on our website. You can see the scenarios. All of these scenarios that we have on our web pages are real scenarios that have been provided by the partners that we're working with. So we have implementation partners that are already starting to implement the protocol and use it to communicate with other services. And basically what this is patterns. So again, this is basically about standardization and interoperability so that these patterns are common patterns across all the communications that we're doing. And we are very grateful that we have received a very significant grant from the Arcadia Foundation, which is a UK foundation based in the UK, $4 million that we will be using over the next 4 years to support implementation with our implementation partners who are listed here. And the other aspect of the grant will go towards creating the documentation around the protocol so that all that documentation will be publicly available and will be able to be used and implemented by other services that are interested in using it. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Unfortunately, I have to leave at 2:30 for the airport, but there's a lot of documentation on our website, and I'm always available via email. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kathleen. We have a further contribution as part of this session, but that is from Tom Demeranville from ORCiD. He unfortunately couldn't be here today, but he was kind enough to record the video for his 5-minute presentation, so I guess we're going to display that now. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Tom. Sorry I can't be there. I'm the product director at ORCiD. Instead of being over there in sunny America, I'm in pretty cold and dark, wet England. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you very briefly through what we're doing here at ORCiD with peer review and pose maybe an interesting question at the end. So let's get on with it. So from an ORCiD perspective, what we do is support a range of review activities that can be added to ORCiD records. And they can be added to the records by ORCiD member systems with the permission of the researcher. So these can be publisher systems or third-party systems that specialise in recognising review, for example. You can see a screenshot here. This is an F1000 review, and you can see that this is a fully open review, so it not only links to the thing that was reviewed, but the review itself as well. We have almost 900,000 ORCiD records with at least one peer review on them now, and nearly 8 million review items, between them. So the number of reviews are growing over the year on year, and also the number of integrations. These are ORCiD member systems that are doing it. I've only put in the top 7 here. There's actually hundreds of them. But we can see here Springer Nature doing great at the top, going down through ATS, NDPI, Web Science PLOS, and then some of the Wiley journals as well. I can provide more information to people that are interested, but the list does go on, but it quickly tails off from here. We're seeing roughly 2 million, 2.5 million reviews being added a year right now. However, and this is the question that I'd like to pose, and maybe we can discuss that at another time when I'm actually in the room. But we're working with researchers all the time, and we have an advisory group that we work with in my team to ask them questions about what they'd like to see on their records and how they'd like their records to be used. And we were talking to them about professional activities, these things like editing journals, being a data librarian, for example, but also things like review and the recognition they get and how they could share that information. And we were really surprised, actually, when we talked to them, because they told us that the idea of counting the number of reviews on an ORCiD record in terms of using that as a metric for judging how well someone's doing a review, it just doesn't make sense, right? Because reviews are all about quality and not about quantity. They gave us some other examples. I've got the ever helpful, I haven't received the item yet, or I haven't watched the movie yet, 5 stars kind of review, which is of no value to anyone, right? But they were telling us that some reviews are almost like that when it comes to peer review. Some could be pages and pages of very useful details, and others can be hardly anything. So I guess the question that I've got for the group is, how can the community start to measure quality as well as quantity of peer review activity? And I know we're talking about preprint peer review activity, so I guess we'll talk about it in that context. Anyway, thanks for listening. Sorry again I can't be there. Maybe I'll catch you next time. I had a great time the time before. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So this is the end of this section. We're going to have a break now. Expect everyone to be back at 2:30 p.m. for those here in the room. If I have my counts right, this is 19:30 p.m. UTC for those online. And we are going to then have another set of 3 presentations from other platforms projects, all related to indexing. So yeah, please be back by 2:30.